Very interesting revelations regarding the Battlefield series. We got our first hard info on Premium and what we can expect, but there was also a couple of articles released. One of them goes into the potential of a competitive Battlefield platform in 2017, and the other one, pretty big one this, no new Battlefield game for the next couple of years. What does it all mean? Well, we're going to get stuck into all of that, but first, Premium. Now, we already knew that the first DLC was coming next year in March, but now we've got solid confirmation of that. The first DLC is called They Shall Not Pass, and while there isn't an actual date for release, it's confirmed for March next year. It's also going to bring the French army into the game, and we now know that one of the future DLCs will also bring in the Russian forces as well. Beyond the first DLC, this is what we know. The Premium Pass will grant you 16 new multiplayer maps. That's the usual 4 maps spread across 4 DLCs. One will cover the French army, one for the Russian army, and then the other 2 are currently unknown. As well as that, we're going to get 20 new weapons to play with. That's 5 per DLC, I'm assuming, if they're shared out evenly. I have a feeling that we're going to see some pretty interesting and exciting weapons, and probably a lot of prototypes as well. I'm really looking forward to seeing what gets added to the game. I'd definitely be up for a Secret Weapons of World War I DLC, for example. As well as maps, Premium will also grant you access to new elite classes, new vehicles and new operations and game modes. I imagine that there's a good chance that each new DLC will have its own operations, and then we'll get new custom game modes added each time on top of that. Alongside that, you can expect 14 unique dog tags and 14 battle packs containing standout weapon skins. Now that could mean that there'll be some unique skins for Premium only perhaps. As always, Premium also gets you 2 weeks early access to the new DLC when it's out, with an option afterwards for people who don't have Premium to buy it separately. There is one thing missing that I thought they would add to Premium, and that's new single player war stories. It seems to me that because of the modular system and freeform, the way that the single player campaign is, it's something that could definitely have been added in each DLC, a themed war story, and that's not to say that they won't do something like that down the line, but there is currently no mention of it. Also, you've got to bear in mind that it's a lot of work to put something like that together, so it might just not be that feasible at all. Okay, so that's Premium, pretty much what you'd expect, I'd say. Maps, weapons, elites, vehicles, early access, and glorious battle packs. But what if I told you there was a possibility of a standalone Battlefield game aimed at the competitive gaming market? What would you say? This would be entirely separate from Battlefield 1, so it wouldn't affect the current player base or the fun that players could have, but maybe it would be a game designed to appease esports and competitive gameplay and get Battlefield properly into the competitive shooter scene. Well, bear with me because I'm going to explain why I think that this might be a possibility. Earlier this month in Phoenix, Arizona, EA Chief Officer Peter Moore was present at the annual technology conference there, and he talked about the publisher's plans to turn Battlefield into a competitive platform. Here's what he said back then, and this is thanks to a website called DualShockers, so I will link the article in the description below. We've watched this with great interest for the last couple of years and decided in the last 6 months that the time is right to start to invest in this, and not only on our licensed properties, but even you'll see us in calendar year 2017 fully engaged with our Battlefield franchise, a wholly owned IP, and starting to build our competitive game modes as part of that franchise. Okay, so Peter Moore, he's been heavily invested in esports for a long time now in his role as chief officer, but primarily esports has been something in terms of EA for FIFA and Madden. Their sports games have done extremely well. Of course, BF4 did have an esports scene, and in fact it had way more money up for grabs than a lot of people realised. Over 5 seasons of professional tournaments with LAN finals in Germany, offering €20,000 in prize money. Obviously that pales in comparison to a game like CSGO, but the scene is there. BF1 on the other hand just isn't very well suited for competitive play. I love the game in a public sense, I think it's fantastic for the most part, but it's for jumping on with mates and having a blast and not taking it too seriously, whereas a competitive shooter definitely needs to have things that Battlefield 1 just doesn't have. It needs a skill gap for starts and a specific game mode that caters to the specific needs of a tournament based game. It's very hard to dedicate time to that when the majority of the current player base just doesn't need or want it. And Peter Moore went on to say this: There are microtransaction opportunities in Battlefield called Battle Packs that allow you to progress your way through the game. We've also seen, in particular with great admiration for what Counter-Strike Global Offensive has been able to do, and to their credit, and the engagement levels with that are phenomenal. We'll simply sell more copies of Battlefield with the fact that there are competitive types of gaming modes built in to allow people to compete. Now, I find it very interesting that they comment on CSGO because I don't think they've done this before, and arguably that's the perfect example of a competitive game done right over the years. It has no compromises. The game is made to be a balanced and competitive shooter, and the rest just falls into place, and the games that the public play in matchmaking are more or less the same as what the pros play at tournaments. Sure, CSGO definitely caters more for the masses now than, say, it did with older versions, but the competitive aspect is still and always will be there. Right, so a separate Battlefield game then. Where on earth are you getting that from, Jack? Well, I am of course just trying to put two and two together here, but the reality for me is that BF1 is not a competitive game, and you can add modes to it, but the reality is that the base game just isn't suited to esports, and you can't go messing about with a fun formula just to make it that way. Right now, the only game modes you could use are Domination and Rush. War Pigeons just is nowhere near a comp mode, and Conquest and Operations are too large. Domination, on the other hand, was so hated as a competitive mode on BF4 that it eventually was changed to Squad Obliteration, a mode not currently present in BF1. So if BF1 were to use Domination, it would definitely be going backwards. It isn't a good competitive game mode, and it's too random. You can't control it, you can't spawn on the flags, it just doesn't work very well. Not to mention the fact that the ticket system just doesn't work for competitive either, so I guess that would need to be changed specifically for that. BF4 is an older game now, so that isn't really viable. So what's the other solution? Making a standalone game designed for esports separate from the base games. But the question is, can you make a game specifically for esports or competitive? Well, I think you can, and you can look at Overwatch as a perfect example of that. I know it's a long shot, but I do believe it could happen, and I think if it were to happen, then DICE LA rather than Stockholm would be leading it. I think finally developers may see the benefit in having a game like CSGO where you've got a massive esports following and you subsidize the game with skins, knives, even gloves. Now in CSGO's case, I'm surprised developers haven't done it sooner. And just to back this up with a little bit of evidence, back in 2015 we had suggestions that DICE LA would be working on their own game eventually. EA Studio Executive Vice President Patrick Soderlund said of DICE LA, they've really not only created good stuff, they've taken over Battlefield 4, I'm guessing that's in reference to CTE and the expansion packs they made, and they've done a great job with BF4 since the launch of it. They've built great expansion packs, but more importantly, they've created an identity for us in Los Angeles. And also, EA CEO Andrew Wilson added, I have no doubt that DICE LA will be building their game at some point because it's a really passionate group of people. I think that's a pretty big hint there. Also, I've noticed in a couple of those hey come and work here videos that DICE LA have put out, from time to time you can see screens of the stuff that they're working on, and in a couple of screens there's a character model and animations that I don't recognise from any current Battlefield game. Of course, these models and animations could just be from anything, could just be someone practicing, working on whatever, so it doesn't really confirm anything, but I thought it was interesting enough to include in this video. As well, in these videos specifically made for DICE LA, we see "This is our Battlefield" crop up on multiple occasions, and if that's not a hint, then I don't know what is. Now that in itself doesn't mean they're now working on a standalone game, but I guess it's if the shoe fits. With BF4, DICE LA had a tremendous amount of work to do and claw back the player base with the CTE to help get the game going in the right direction. But even though BF1 may end up having a CTE, I don't see it as much of a priority as it was with BF4 because, simply put, for the most part, BF1 works. It functions well, it doesn't crash all the time, it's fine in that aspect, it just needs balancing and a few bug fixes. I'd like to think that the CTE in BF4 came around because the game was fundamentally broken when it launched. The need arose because of how bad the launch of the game was and just how unstable it was, and then when DICE LA had fixed all of that stability and most of the bugs, CTE then kind of turned into, hey, test out these new DLC maps or these balance changes. Therefore, I just don't see it as being a massive priority for Battlefield 1. And of course, that gap of workload there could potentially leave DICE LA with the opportunity, the time and the money to be working on a standalone title of their own. So when could this game release then? Well, it looks like if it were to happen, it wouldn't be next year. EA CFO Blake Jorgensen has said, "We don't have another Battlefield for a couple of years," at a recent speaking event, but interestingly, when Peter Moore was talking about Battlefield, he did say this: "But even you'll see us in calendar year 2017 fully engaged with the Battlefield franchise, a wholly owned IP, and starting building up our competitive game modes, like I mentioned earlier." He suggests that they'll be working towards something, so maybe perhaps a release date is more into 2018, or something else to consider is a Battlefield spin-off. Is that being counted as another game in the series? Could we see a Battlefield Special Tactics or Battlefield Fill in the Gap Here type spin-off game aimed at esports? And in that Blake Jorgensen article, it also goes on to say that DICE are going to be focusing on Battlefront 2 and making that much bigger and broader than the first game, because obviously a lot of fans complained that there wasn't much depth in the game. But something that Peter Moore also touched on is that the idea of trying to get a FIFA Ultimate Team model into a Battlefield game, something I think that maybe we'll see down the line in some shape or form. Of course, this is all speculation and me trying to read between the lines, and DICE LA may not be working on a Battlefield game at all. In theory, they could be tasked with a different game entirely, or be simply focusing on assisting with BF1, but I think if EA are serious about turning the Battlefield platform into a competitive shooter, and that's a very important choice of words, then they'll probably need a standalone game to do that, and I for one really look forward to seeing what they do there. So there we have it, that's all for today folks. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. No Battlefield game for the next couple of years, and are DICE LA or DICE Stockholm perhaps working on a standalone Battlefield competitive esports game? Only time will tell. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, a thumbs down. Thanks for watching as always guys, and I'll see you in the next one.